Good morning. Everybody prays. When we get to the end of our tether, when we've no longer got any control over what is happening, everybody cries out. Maybe we don't know to whom we cry out to. Maybe we use words that we haven't used before. But everybody prays. I'm sat in one of the chairs in my study, and I indeed pray here sometimes. Where do you pray? And more to the point, when you pray, what happens if you don't see or hear an answer to your prayer? In Luke chapter 18, we have two stories that Jesus told, two parables, and both are about prayer. The first one involves a judge and a widow and speaks of the persistence in prayer. And the second, a Pharisee and a tax collector went to the temple to pray. Sounds like a bit like the beginning of a joke, but it's not. There are some real deep learnings for us from that story about position and about power, about self-importance and about humility. But both stories are about prayer. You'll see I've highlighted those words towards the beginning of the parable. Always pray and not give up. And if you look a little further down to the second bit in pink, we have Jesus saying, listen to what the unjust judge says. And in the words in green just above it, you can see in that parable what the judge says. Jesus is likening this judge to God, and he's likening this widow to those of us who pray. And right at the end of this passage, however, we have Jesus saying, however, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Faith like this, faith of persistence, faith of keep banging on, keep praying, just as the widow kept badgering after the judge for justice. This parable is needed because God works in his time and not your time and not my time. You know, when we pray for something and we don't see the outcome in the way we want or at the time we want, doesn't mean that God hasn't listened to our prayers. The point of this parable is to encourage those of us who pray, those who cry out to God, to be persistent, to keep banging like the widow did with the judge, banging on the door of God's heavenly office and allowing him to continually hear our pleas and our prayers. Be a God botherer. Keep persisting in prayer. In this second parable, we have a Pharisee standing up and praying about himself. There's a self-importance that this person has. They're following the law. They're doing things right. Others aren't quite hitting the mark. And then we have this tax collector who stands at a distance, not even looking up to heaven, but beating his breast and saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. This second man, the tax collector, moves off to a more distant location to be by himself, not to be heard by others, whereas the Pharisees sought to attract the attention of others. This second man, this tax collector, is unwilling to lift his eyes to heaven. That's a sign of shame and would have been done with a bowed head if you look at Isaiah 58 verse 5. He didn't consider himself worthy to even look up to God. And he beats his breast while speaking. This is an action of deep contrition, of great emotional anguish. It's actually the same action that's recorded among the crowd as they were leaving after having seen Jesus being crucified. Two parables about prayer. The first about being persistent in prayer. Just as the judge listened to the widow, God listens to you and me. He listens to our prayers. But we need to be patient in our persistence in prayer because it's God's will and it's God's time. He hears, but we shouldn't always expect results from our prayers. in the way that we want, or even in the time that we want. But that shouldn't stop us praying. And the point of the parable is to encourage us to pray. When Jesus comes back, will he find us as a prayerful people? And the second, about position and about prestige or humility. It's not praying as the Pharisee would pray and being in the center of everything where everyone can see and everyone can hear what's going on. But it's praying as the tax collector prayed, finding a quieter spot, not worrying who's watching, pleading, looking down, beating the breast. Two parables about prayer, being persistent, but also understanding our position and praying with patient faith in humility.